Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Kirsten Wiley, and I am here today to introduce and welcome Daniel Suarez, who is visiting us as part of the Microsoft Research Visiting Speaker Series. Daniel Suarez is here today to discuss Daemon. Daemon brings readers on a harrowing journey through the dark crawl spaces of the modern world. The main character has just died of brain cancer, but death doesn't stop him from initiating an all-out internet war against humanity. We are challenged as the reader to consider the implications of living in a technologically advanced world and whether democracy can survive it. Mr. Suarez is an independent systems consultant to Fortune 1000 companies. He has designed and developed enterprise software for the defense, finance, and entertainment industries. An avid gamer and technologist, Suarez declares that all technology depicted in the book is accurate and in current use, and is currently working on the eagerly anticipated sequel, Freedom. So please join me in welcoming Dan to Microsoft to discuss Daemon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. It sounds like my microphone's on, so I'll try to project anyway. I'm going to keep this rather informal. I'm planning on talking for about 20 minutes about where the book came from and also about my adventure in self-publishing and how it kind of in an unlikely sequence of events that landed me here today talking to you. Let me start by discussing the book. I don't know how many have read it. It is the story of a highly successful online game developer who creates a daemon, a program that monitors the web for the appearance of his own obituary. And when that appears, it triggers a cascade of programs that begins to tear apart the supporting systems of the modern world. It's not a comedy, obviously. I stuck with real technology to the extent that I wanted to expose what I felt were some of the weaknesses of creating a hyper-efficient system, a precision machine of the modern world. So I didn't want to scare people. I didn't want to stoke fear. I just wanted to try to inform the public about the risk of this through hopefully a thrilling story. I originally conceived of writing this book as a nonfiction book, but I think that would have a very limited audience. So. Also, an interesting point for Microsoft is that Daemon really is like a Word document gone out of control. I started doodling in Word, and over months it started to form into a novel. And I, in fact, wrote the entire novel in Microsoft Word, and then later typeset the novel. And Dutton later used that file to physically create the final novel that's in all the stores. So whoever works on Word, good job. Saved me buying a dedicated program for that. Thank you very much. This will be helpful. I'm fighting a virus of my own, I think, at this point. Now, one of the reasons, one of the epiphanies I had that made me want to write this book, back in 1999, I wrote a program called Weathermaster, and I'd be amazed if anybody here had heard of it. It was a small application that created fictitious weather for fictitious worlds. And you're probably wondering, there's a market for that? Yes, there is. It's for role-playing gamers. And I sold this program into 38 countries. And it was one of those things, I don't know if anybody here is a developer, they know soft locks. It was a wrapper control, a polymorphic encryption wrapper. It's a licensing control. And I wrapped my program in that, put it on the web. This is like 1999. People could download it, try it for 30 days, and it would disable itself after that. If you buy it, the money gets swept into a merchant account. The merchant account automatically gets swept to pay for the website and the advertising. And it ran completely automated. And I went away to work on some client projects for a few months, came back, and there was all this money in there. And I remember thinking, wow, if I kick the bucket, this is just going to keep going. And then I started thinking what else you could do if you were dead. And it turns out that the answer is quite a bit. Modern society is designed mostly, we have impersonal communication with each other. You order things online, you send emails, send notifications. There's a lot of programs that react to market conditions as well. So there's, technology serves as a stand-in for humans in a great many places. Let me take another sip of this here. Wow, that's hot. So I don't want to make too big a point of this, but my goal in writing this book was to try to follow to its logical conclusion the most dastardly thing that could occur, given the current design of modern society. And the idea of a virus that's reading the news and changing what it's doing in response to that, I thought was intriguing. And I tried to hew to more realistic technologies here, researched everything I did not know to try to make it as impactful as possible. I don't know about you, but it's on occasion I've read techno-thrillers where I've just wanted to throw it against the wall. Hopefully you don't do that with Daemon. Oh, let's see here. Let me go through my notes. Self-publishing. This book was originally self-published under the pen name Linad Ziraus, and if you're thinking quickly, that's my name backwards. I would get interesting emails, people asking me, who's this Czechoslovakian German guy? It's just my name backwards. And gamers got it pretty immediately. Any of you who play online games, you try to put your name in and it's already taken, so you switch the letters around. I think that's why gamers got it immediately. I'm somewhat of a gamer myself. But I could not find a publisher for this book. And I would think that'd be interesting for Microsoft people. You guys are techies. Because the refrain was twofold, that it was too long at 140,000 words, and also too technical. And I am of the opinion that technology is really part of being literate in the modern world. You have to have some familiarity with technology, or you cannot function. You just have to be too trusting to function. So I did not want to change the book so much to boil it down to simple terms. I wanted to try to keep it pretty challenging, even for people in the street. Although it is accessible, I try to bring people through it. So if you don't know a lot of technology, and that's probably nobody in this audience, but I wanted to make it accessible to just anybody who wanted to read a good story. And hopefully in the process, they would learn something along the way. But I didn't shorten the book. After trying, I think it was 48 agents getting turned down, 3 of them were interested, thought it was too long. I decided to self-publish it. It was with a company called Lightning Source. And they were part of Ingram Distribution, and that gave me access to Amazon, and I was able to reach about half of the Western world just by printing this document in digital form. It would be bound up in 30 or 40 seconds and made available and shipped out to anyone who ordered it on Amazon. And I think about that democratizing power of technology. It's remarkable. Think how many gatekeepers there are in between you and mainstream publishing. And I don't want to say I kind of came in the back door, but I did. I went out to find an audience myself. I was convinced there were people out there who wanted a challenging story that was interesting, didn't dumb it down for them. And thankfully, I was right. I'm starting to disagree with that maxim that nobody ever lost money underestimating the education or the intelligence of the American people. I think there's some very sharp people out there. So what happened was, my wife Michelle, she came up with this idea that we would have a grassroots media campaign to 24 people, tech bloggers, tech journalists, people at eWeek, things like that. And about half of these people got back to us and requested copies of the book, which was astounding to me. But it was because I knew who they were. I was familiar with their work. I demonstrated that in the letters to them. So they responded to me. And that's, once again, the connecting power of the web. They read the book. They passed it on to others. And those people passed it on to others. And eventually it got up into Silicon Valley, into Stuart Brand's hands, Chris Anderson, got into Wired magazine, and then it started to blow up. That was about a year and 2 months, do you think, Michelle? Year and a couple months, perhaps? But for anybody who has a novel in them, don't get too discouraged if you're a year down the road and you've only sold a couple hundred copies, because that's where I was. And when it hits pretty big, fast, I should say. About 3 or 4 months after the Wired magazine article, mainstream publishers were coming to me, and Hollywood as well. So that, to me, just proved everything. If anybody ever tells you that self-publishing is a dead end, it is not. I'm here to tell you that. All you have to do, and I don't mean to make this sound simple, you just have to define your audience. You have to reach an audience, prove that you have one, and then publishing will come to you. And I think it's because of the inherent risks in publishing. The current publishing system of returns, where bookstores order books, and if they can't sell them, they send them back much to the detriment of publishers, because it's publishers who eat the cost. Companies like Microsoft and other high-tech companies will help publishing that way. I think print on demand, which is the technology that I used, is the future of publishing. I think publishers are trying to figure out how to make that fit into their business model. Now, I've seen that firsthand. I haven't met a single person in mainstream publishing in New York who doesn't understand that that system is not sustainable the way it currently is. But it's like working on a car while someone's driving it. I mean, they've got to keep shipping books out. It's a big logistical problem, and nobody can change it. And I think I look at that as a huge technological challenge. And I think print on demand, particularly print on demand in store, where you would go into a store, choose from 1.5 million titles, go get a cup of coffee after you order it from your smartphone. I think that's the future of publishing. Sure, you'll have the mainstream titles, the big ones there ready to be picked up, but you should be able to go into any store in the country and get some obscure Sanskrit book. I mean, there's nothing technologically to stop that. And let's face it, most books are not works of art. You'd still get your coffee table books bound with gold ink and all that stuff. That'll be done in advance. But as you can tell, I'm a big proponent of self-publishing. I feel like I'm becoming an evangelist for that. I think it's a wonderfully democratizing effect on literature in general. Now let me go through my notes here again. Now, for those of you who have read the book, you might notice that there are some undertones in that book about my opinions about the fragility of the modern world, having to do with its efficiency. I won't speak too much about that because I think I tend to go off on this a bit too much. But if you haven't read it and you're about to, pay attention to that aspect of it, because I worked for 17 years as a systems analyst in logistics and relational database design. And it was over that period of time that I really do see a concentration, continual mergers creating bigger and bigger companies, and fewer hands controlling more and more. And it is very efficient. It makes a lot of sense from a business point of view. But I do see some concerns for our civilization in general, creating a hyper-efficient system that is very susceptible to sudden shocks. And that's one of the themes that I tried to address in this book. Let's see, what else haven't I covered? Oh, the film rights. For those of you, once again, who've read the book, you might be happy to know or upset to know that I did sell the film rights, and I sold them to Walter Parks, and they're developing it with Paramount Pictures. He's the guy who did War Games. He was one of the co-writers. Talked to a lot of people in Hollywood. I think he's the guy for this. So hopefully he won't, well, I don't think he will. I think he'll do a great job. I think he will. And, you know, that's really all I have. I'm happy to answer any questions. Anybody?
Has anyone already read the book, or was it excerpted in Wired?
You know, they didn't excerpt it in Wire, although I did put 7 chapters up on the internet for people to read. I figured I have nothing to hide if they like the first 7 chapters. And so far, it's been doing very well. So please don't be timid. I'm timid.
I'm kind of curious. So you talked about self-publishing and how and using the internet as a way to get find your audience, get your book out. What's your take on electronic books and that whole move, like Kindle, Sony's e-readers, and that whole rigmarole?
I might surprise some people on this. Obviously, I'm a technology guy. We just bought a Kindle. I have some concerns about e-readers. I like it as a companion to physical literature for this reason. I had a friend recently, he was reading Abraham Lincoln's biography, 1,200 pages, while he was traveling. That's a tough thing to put in your briefcase. He still bought the physical book, but he read it on, I think, a Kindle. The environmental arguments about e-readers, I sometimes wonder about that, about the circuit boards, about the energy and the toxic waste from circuit boards, lead solder, the casing, the LCD screen, all of this stuff, how many years you keep it, what is the net impact environmentally? I don't know. I think the jury's out on that. So I put that off to the side. I also worry sometimes about the proprietary nature of the machine. I like the idea of literature being such that it can be pulled off a shelf 30, 40, 50 years from now when the power's off. Because that is the corpus of our culture. It's, not to wax too philosophical about it, but that's one of the concerns I have. That said, am I going to get one? Sure. We just have. I think it's a great companion to it, especially if it can help the environment. Like I said, I'm still on the fence about that, but hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just thinking of the cost structure. I mean, you talked about the fact that nobody wanted to touch your book because a narrow audience, large book, that means cost, right?
Correct. Especially if they have to eat the cost when they're returned because they're not sold. Well, that's why I was thinking primarily of something like it, and I'm not going to try to promote individual companies while I'm standing up here, but print-on-demand companies that create these presses can produce a book in 30 seconds. Having one of those in a store, I think would be great, because then you get the best of both worlds. You're just shipping blank paper around the country. And then when you want a book, take your phone or some card, barcode, say I want this book, go get a cup of coffee in store. In a few minutes your book is done, you pick it up. That makes a lot of sense to me. I could still see it being a companion to an e-reader if you had that you might have both. But that's where I see the future of self-publishing going. We'll see if I'm right. But I think we had a question.
Yes, first, congratulations on the coverage on it.
Oh, God, thank you.
That was great. As the self-publishing, just a data point that might be interesting. I don't know what sort of final business analysis was done or if one was done, but I know that a few years back here at Microsoft, the games team put together a deal where kiosks went into, I think it was CompUSA, obviously didn't play out too well, but where you could go and order up, I don't know if they're Xbox games or games for PC or a mix of them, and it would burn it right there.
Right there.
Print out the
Doesn't that make
games,
perfect
and
sense?
kick it out. So it was done in the gaming world, and USA isn't around. I don't know if it's cause and effect, but I don't know really how that went. But
were those kiosks in right up till the end, or?
Not sure.
Yeah. Because, see, I'd go for that, but, am I an early adopter? I don't know. I probably am. Maybe it was too soon. So I can think. I do get the sense that people are more aware of both environmental issues and cost issues now. Maybe more receptive to getting their hands dirty and touching a machine to create their product right there. I don't know. I think it makes perfect sense from a logistical point of view, of course. If the cost came down because you did it yourself, I bet that would be a big determinant. I don't know whether they did that in this particular case.
The cost of inventory down to next to nothing.
Yeah, I would think. Yeah, so I don't know. I guess we will find out. I'm hoping things like that take off, both in bookstores and in music and other things like that. Sure.
I spent a lot of time in the publishing world in New York. You know what I think is going to move to that? You know what I think is going to move that make it go? Is the government is looking very hard at getting textbooks reduced in cost for students because it's a huge problem. Plus, as soon as they're printed in so many fields, they're outdated.
Right.
So they're looking to do that kind of kiosk downloading of textbooks, kind of moving as a way, and the government, the Congress is taking action about it.
See, that's a great idea.
Kind of pushing the publisher, the textbook.
A critical
publisher
mass, basically.
They're kind of they don't want to do this, publishers. They'd rather just be in the 19th century, but they're getting kind of pushed to do this by social groups. So I think that's where it'll start, and then I think it'll probably go to like travel guides, other things that are immediately.
That's right, and it would also save little kids' backs. Because I've looked at kids' backpacks lately. Like, what the hell is going on? It's like they're little bellboys walking around. I feel like tipping them. Yeah, it's crazy. That would help them as well. But did we have a question? Yes.
Is there a difference between the pen? So you released it under a different pen name the first time.
Yeah, why
is there
did
a
I do
difference
that?
in the content of the book other than the different?
Very little. Shockingly, very little. First of all, a word about my pen name. I used my pen name partly because I had a very responsible job, and writing a book about hacking didn't seem like a great idea. When I'm like elbow deep into my clients' networks, they're like, "Did you write this?" So that was one reason. The other was that Linad Zeros is this great search term. Like, I own the first 3 pages of search results everywhere, because who's named that? Nobody. So it turned out to be doubly effective. Once we got the Dutton deal, we'd already gotten enough press that I didn't have to be so much concerned about it. And since it was getting a good response, I wanted to say, well, yeah, I did it. And that's why I went back to my real name. But yeah, that's the story behind Linad Zeros. But I think there was another part of your question, was it? Did I answer it? Okay. Oh, the content. That's what it was. The first chapter is different. And this was the one concession I made. I thought they had a good argument, and that was whoever has seen the self-published version, I just went right out there with some technology. And they thought, well, we want to make this a mainstream thriller. We want it in every single airport store, in every store, but we can't do that if it's too technical. If people have to climb over a barbed wire fence to get into the story, tone down the first chapter a little. And I thought that was a reasonable argument. And that's literally the only editorial change they wanted me to make to reduce the technical content. Virtually the rest of it is identical, except they wanted to add a chapter, which I'd already written, which showed me that they really understood the book because they didn't want to reduce the length of it for cost reasons. They thought, could we have a little more here? And of course, any writer would say, oh, sure. You want me to write more? I'll be happy to do that. So those are the only changes, really. Other than that, they're almost identical. So I was surprised. Anybody else? Yes?
Which version do you like better?
Ah, you went there. I go back and forth. I'm starting to really like this new version better. It might be because so many more people have read this one and have said kind things about it. Maybe they're starting to convince me. But you know, if I had my choices, I always like to be a bit technical and just wade into it. But what they suggested made perfect sense. And since they're so close, it's very difficult to say. So I would say this new one I like better because it can reach more people. And ultimately, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to reach people. Actually, this is something worth talking about because I've had some people say, well, you wanted to talk about self-publishing and evangelize that, and then you went and you got a mainstream deal. And it actually makes pretty good sense because what I really wanted to do was reach as many people as possible with this book. And there's like this last mile problem right now for self-publishing that you can get your book on the web, but you'll notice all these bookstores around. You know, that's where a lot of people buy books. And getting into those stores is a no-go for self-publishing. It just doesn't make any sense. It goes against the whole point, really, right now. So until machines are in stores to create books, really, to reach the broadest audience possible, you really have to go with a mainstream publisher. That's why I view it as a stepping stone, almost like a farming system for new authors. Right now, you send your manuscript into agents. They serve as the gatekeepers, and they have these massive piles of material they have to go through to find that golden nugget in there. And I think that the problem can be crowdsourced. You can put it out. Everybody, instead of submitting a manuscript, they self-publish. And any book that starts to succeed gets noticed by agents, and then they bring it to publishers. And that, to me, sounds like a really good way to do it. So, I don't know. That's my take on grassroots publishing, and I more than answered your question. Probably more than you wanted. And yes?
I haven't read the book yet, but I have been reading several novels in a similar vein recently. You said that originally you were thinking of doing it nonfiction.
Yeah.
Served more as, so was the intent more as a warning?
A cautionary tale is what it turned into. But yeah, very much so. I was going to call it, I even had the cover all figured out. It was going to be The Case for Inefficiency. I was going to have a peacock on the cover. Because, I go into this a little in the book, but so I won't try to get too detailed right now, but I was always fascinated by the theory that sex exists to introduce some genetic diversity, to evade parasitic infestation. Doesn't sound so romantic, I know. But the idea being that any population left on its own for a sufficiently long time tends to go towards, I believe the term is parthenogenesis, which is self-reproducing. Very little genetic variation. And then what will eventually happen, and you could picture some snails in some pool on the top of a volcano, isolated for tens of thousands of years, eventually a parasite is introduced into the population, and this genetically uniform population crashes. And so, you know, there's one of the things I talk about in the book is building diversity and building mutation into society. That hyper-efficiency has a great short-term reward, but in the long term, it tends to crash. And the sustainable systems tend to constantly be changing. So that's one of the things that I talk about in the book. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I have more, but...
Go for it.
You know, some would argue that the fragility of the systems that run today aren't necessarily so much due to their uniformity, but due to their lack of any consistently applied proper design, proper security, proper thought. I mean, we've got, you know, the control systems for nuclear reactors available via the internet access. A 30-minute job and you're controlling a nuclear power plant in Illinois.
Allow me to 100% agree with you. What we've commandeered this network to do, it seems way beyond its original scope to me. I think originally it was designed to make scientists communicate with each other over an unreliable network, packet switching networks. And now we're like, hey, online banking, stock trading, nuclear power plants, dams. I'd be totally for an infrastructure redesign with security as the first bullet point in that. I agree with you completely. The realities are that you definitely have to get people to understand what the situation is. Now, I won't say I was trying to do all that in this book, but certainly to let people know what the issues are and how technology affects them, regardless of whether they pay any attention to technology. I've sometimes said it sounds a little silly, but if you don't do technology, it will do you. Because it...
Security a roadblock to innovation and democracy? I don't mean the political sense of it, but if I want to get my message out, security is a roadblock to me.
It is. I prefer the term speed bump, but it'll slow you down a little. There's no doubt. But that to me is the yin and yang of nature. If you want to be a supremely efficient organism and produce with the minimum caloric expenditure, you can reproduce yourself genetically identical, or you can go the opposite way and have wild variation. And then there's all sorts of gradations in between. And I think there's cost-benefit analysis. And I think somewhere right in the middle is the sweet spot.
Security doesn't necessarily mean the restriction of information.
Right. So security is what allows you to get your information out and be able to be alive.
Oh, God, I love this, man. This is great. See, this is what I was trying to do. Get these.
I understand your problem, Josh, but, but my concern is security means identification. And now Big Brother knows where I am. Okay. And so I can't get my message out.
Security and identification are different things.
Yes. Well, okay. I guess it's about clarification of security.
Anybody ever read any David Brain around here?
Yeah.
See, Transparent Society. Did you ever read Transparent Society? I'm one of those people who thinks that privacy is, not just gone, it's been gone a while. But the idea, if I can authenticate...
I'm a privacy guy here. That's not true. That's not true.
Okay.
To a certain extent.
Well, I wonder if everybody can see each other and it's sort of a fishbowl. Actually, we should talk more. I'll probably bore everybody here. Because I hope you're right. If you come up with an answer, I'm for it. I love privacy. But the idea that there's all these cameras everywhere, but we don't have access to them, but someone does, that bothers me a little. I like the idea of cameras if I have a problem. It's this contradictory emotions about it.
You're talking about like uniform versus non-uniform privacy, right?
Oh, well, yeah, actually, the uniformity thing is almost a separate issue. Because, if you have a very uniform surveillance system and it crashes, I guess I'm not as upset. But this would be the idea of authenticating users is really what you're talking about. Who is who and where and when.
I don't want that.
But we certainly have that, with these little devices we're carrying. I'd be curious what the database looks like.
Yes. For specific systems, security is important. But security across the internet, I think that would be a bad thing.
Given its current design, I don't think you could even do it. Yeah, exactly.
Not the way it is today.
But what would you feel about separate systems? One that handles critical infrastructure and the other one that handles online games and all this other stuff.
That was wonderful.
See, that would be something that would make sense because we'd have to do a square one rewrite of it anyway, with security built in at the very base, I would think.
Did I hear you say security across the internet would be a bad thing?
Oh, that's a soundbite for you. I went up to see Microsoft. What anarchists? Do you hear these guys?
This is our version of a cage fight, right?
I love it, man. I want to pull up a chair and look at you guys.
I reject as a false dichotomy this pitting of security against privacy. We don't need to have one or the other. We really can't have both.
I agree with that.
Good.
Oh, I love it. So is it like a token, encrypted token, and it identifies you like a session? What?
Potentially. It depends on the application. It depends on what you're trying to do.
So it's invisible to the user and it's at the application. Right? Okay. I like it. See, I love stuff like this. I'm such a geek. Well, any other questions? Anybody? Yes?
I'm a little upset that you said that online gaming wasn't a critical system.
The gamers. It is in my house. I will tell you one great thing about this book is now if I'm playing GTA 4 and my wife comes in, I'm like, hey, I'm doing research. Yeah. It's great. It's great for that reason. Yes?
So I worked at a bank for a long time, and at the bank I could run a report and get all the information of everybody who's ever had an account at the bank. That includes all their social security information, all their previous
That is horrifying.
And I was a normal human, okay? Not like anybody special. I worked behind the counter, nothing spectacular. I saw all your bank account information. I think as long as there's people like that, that there's no way to really keep the critical information in that critical section like you think it needs to be.
Yeah, you almost need to take it away from human responsibility, which then you get into this centralization issue.
And that's exactly where you need security to get your privacy.
You're right.
It is true. I've seen that in a lot of, well, let me see. I got to be careful. Some clients I've had, none recently, have that social security number as the unique identifier. And of course, it's like, God, it's on every report. It's on everything. It's all over the place.
Well, the federal government needs to show social security numbers and tax.
They do. They do. They almost, I feel like, well, of course they do, because, you know, it goes back so far. But there's certainly no excuse for the video store using it. Yeah. I always look at that like, well, you guys are crazy. But I think somebody, yes.
So, with the risk of getting stoned.
Oh, I'm gonna love this.
Western society, you know, is the last century easily, and probably longer, is run on fear, right? First, you know, we had a fear in the before World War II period. We had the fear of
the fear of the other.
The other, Cold War, and the Cold War is gone, and now we've got, you know, the latest boogeyman is climate change, because, you know, Western society needs fear, right? However, given that all the things we depend upon every day, food, water, electricity, everything, is vulnerable in the theme of your book, do you think we would be better spent in Western society worrying more about fixing the problem of just basic survival today that could go straight to hell very quickly, versus something that may get us in a couple hundred years?
So that is a question of sustainability. Would we be better served by not trying to maximize with hyper efficiency what we do, but rather make it sustainable over a much longer period of time? Yeah, I would agree with that, because I look at the fabulous success this civilization has had over, let's say, the last 150 years. Great run. But then you look at civilizations that have been around for 1,000, eking an existence out of the edge of the Himalayas or something like that. Anybody read 3 Cups of Tea? Great book. I wonder who's wiser there. It's like, you know, we're burning the candle at both ends. They're taking it slow. I like to think there's a way to, once again, try to find that sweet spot in the middle, because there's no doubt that we have some sustainability issues. The good thing is it's everywhere now. Everybody's talking about it. Hopefully that results in some action. It seems to be that's what you need to start some action on it. But I wouldn't disagree with that. I'd say, yes, sustainability to me would be the better approach. But anybody else? Any other controversial comments? Yes?
I'm curious to it seems to be, and I haven't read your book yet, but I'm looking forward to it.
Cool.
Your theme is about systems, you know, and seamlessness and so on and so forth. Yet the bigger problems that I have seen in recent history that has privacy issues, like a Starbucks employee losing a laptop with 90,000 people's records on it, or a USB stick with 12,000 UK citizens.
Right, go right to the source.
I mean, it seems to me like man is the biggest problem when it comes to these things, more so than machines are. I wonder what your thinking is about that.
I would agree with that, because when you read a headline that says 41 million identities disappeared because one laptop got stolen somewhere, certainly that's one person's mistake, so it's the weakest link in the chain. In this book, I don't deal, based on our conversation, you might think that it's about privacy. It's not primarily about privacy. Really, one of the things I'm talking about is automation. Sure. And I would agree with you. I would think the human factor is probably Well, let me think. How many people here are developers who've gone to a client, and I'll remember one in particular, had the system administrator's password on a sticky note on the side of a rack server behind a glass wall. Well, it's behind a locked door, but it's a glass wall. It's just like, yeah. But, you know, maybe they were doing something fast. But, yes, definitely the human factor, I would say. Because you have a team, and hopefully everybody's looking at all the angles on that. And somebody brings up a security problem, especially at the design stage. But when somebody does something foolish, for whatever reason, yeah, it can all go right out the window. It's leaving the safe door open. Why have a safe? No. Yes?
I have a couple of questions. The first one's not geeky and the second one is. So the first question is, are you going to self-publish again? You love it so much. The second question is, have you thought about having multiple versions of books? Because
like Daemon 2.15?
Yeah, or the technical version and the non-technical version. Or the, the non-fiction annotated version or whatever. And I realize that writing is time-consuming and hard. It's harder to remix a novel.
If I start complaining, smack me, please. Because this has been, I've been very fortunate. The version thing is interesting. So it's like the diamond slope type version of the book, like the expert version. It'd be interesting. Would I self-publish again? Absolutely. For this reason. Daniel Suarez is a techno-thriller writer. I might not always want to write techno-thrillers. And the way mainstream publishing works is, of course, I think, well, you've probably seen lots of situations where a horror writer takes another name and writes a romance. Because nobody wants to read a romance by Stephen King, most likely. But yeah, so I could see self-publishing again. Plus, it's really gratifying to go out. You'll know this, that you will sell some books. You'll connect with some people. It's just the debate is what size audience that is. It's not whether you're going to have an audience, it's how big it is. And that's kind of satisfying. So, yes. Vince, you had a question.
Yeah, so
Do you still?
You wrote this cautionary tale. You had this journey, met a lot of interesting people, editors on the internet and such. Have you seen any of these seeds blossom into anything that could...
Oh, you mean these new contacts?
Well, are they doing something about this, you know, your concern?
I'm talking to people within government, and I won't make a big deal out of it except to say that, first of all, I'm surprised people in government are reading books like mine, and also playing games, and seem reasonably cool and well-informed, some of these people. And some of those contacts, I think, will be worthwhile, because obviously redesigning the internet from the ground up, it's like, well, it's just a little side project. But it's good to have people in government thinking along the lines of starting from security, you know, from square one at security. Because, you know, the viruses, the botnets that are going around out there, I look at that and I think that's the packet switching, the TCP/IP network issue. If it was a different type of network, if you locked it down by default as opposed to having it inherently open and then locking it down after the fact. The other thing that I talk about a lot in this book, by the way, is differentiating between bots and human beings, which I think is the fundamental problem on the internet. Because here you can have, pardon my voice, you can have a malicious individual or two people who can have this force multiplier where they can suddenly turn into 1 million people. So if you think of the network as a voting system, suddenly these guys have invented 1 million votes. And then you've got all these human users going out doing things. And you've got these malicious users blown out of all proportion to their actual physical presence on Earth. So to me, the idea of designing a system that inherently defines people versus automata, I think that's a key. And that's one of the kind of crazy man on the hill ideas that I have, that you'll see more of in the sequel. So this is my plug for the sequel. It was almost entirely written, and then the Dutton deal happened, and it gave me a chance to step back and change some things due to recent changes. You might have noticed some in the world in the last year. So
I'm kind of curious. So in that vein, there's another thing that kind of sparks that you could argue that when DARPA originally designed the internet, none of the uses that we have now they even thought of. Not the scale, nor
certainly not the
else,
scale,
right?
Yeah.
So you could argue that what we've seen on the internet is the same that we've seen Darwin talk about, the natural evolution of the species. So one of the biggest worries I have when people start, just like you need to design a more secure network, it's kind of like the old adage, let's design a foolproof system. The problem that happens with that is you get a smarter idiot.
That's right.
Right? So it's one of those things, so are we really better off leaving it up to evolution and dealing with issues as we are, or trying to design the perfect world?
Well, would you say the evolutionary component of systems is us? I mean, I look at it that way.
I mean, the evolution part of it has worked okay for man so far.
But we're the one who is the agent of change in these systems. That's what I'm saying. So, yes, we make a rational decision to change that system. And I'm aware of what you're saying. It certainly is something to look out for, starting from scratch. But at the same time, you're right when you say they certainly did not envision any of the current. So basically, you're thinking of it like there's DNA. I'm like, well, let's get rid of DNA. Let's use TNA. Well, that came out weird, but anyway. I suppose, as a radical concept, I don't know. I just think that the way the network is its inherent, well, boy, I want to say its fault, its weakness is inherent open connectivity. I mean, you look at the DNS flaw recently. Yeah, what do you want me to do? Very willing, very trusting, very naive to just clone and become a website in the DNS server. That's one example. I don't know. Did you ever get in a situation where you have this vast, hopefully you're coming in after the fact to fix the problem, right? You do a code review of a system that's a bunch of spaghetti code, and you look at it, and you have to make that decision. Do you deep six it, or do you tear apart some modules? That's kind of what we're facing here. And I don't know whether it's a 100% solution or some fundamental changes, but I don't know, the whole BotNet situation thing, that has me concerned.
That comes back to your point about the publishing world, trying to fix the car whilst we're driving, right?
Exactly.
And that's the classical challenge you have with systems, be it operating systems or applications,
right,
or the infrastructure on which we depend.
There's no timeouts in nature. Yeah.
And the same thing with technology.
Yes, yeah, I would agree. So, to take the squirrel's way out, I wouldn't completely disagree with you, but I wouldn't completely agree either. I think it might be worth revisiting it with an eye towards starting from a security at the foundation and going from there. But yes, my wife's asking me a question. You've been asking me questions all the way up here.
Do you get emotionally attached to your characters? This is a
wow, this is a change of pace.
totally different topic.
Couldn't ask me this in the car.
You haven't really answered this question.
Based on some of the conversations I have, I must not, because I kill so many of them. No, it's some of them, yeah, some of them. I mean, I guess you can't help. And also, it's a little wish fulfillment. I know some people haven't read the book. I'm not going to give anything away by saying this, but I think Walter asked me, are you Ross? Do you picture yourself as Ross? And it's like, no, I'm nowhere near as cool as Ross. So no, they're not autobiographical. A lot of people I used to work with say, oh, which character am I? It's like, I'd never go there. But sort of. Yeah, I do get attached to some. And then later I change my mind and get more attached to others. So. Yes?
So you said a little bit ago that one of your concerns was the fact that a malicious user can get this force multiplier by using bots. What is your opinion on the counter use of that force multiplier for things like
using botnets?
What if you used a botnet to compute some new mathematical formulas, or you using it for physics applications? Or what are you using that force modulator for good?
For good. Or I thought you were going to go to use that same weakness to remove it without the user's permission. So to kill that botnet, it's kind of the same issue.
We'll go there too.
Because let's say if you have a memory leak in your fabulous program and it crashes some machine that runs a kidney dialysis machine or a dam, that's a worry. And I believe it is against the law to run a process on a machine without the user's permission. I guess I should say I absolutely know that to be a fact instead of I believe. I think it is. That said, what is it, the SETI project that has people run some of the processing? Being an opt-in thing, I think it's a great idea. So it's like creating the good botnet. As long as there's an opt-in, I'm totally for it. If not, you definitely don't want processing cycles siphoned off your machine if you're doing something more critical. And if you don't have the ability to say no, I'd have to disagree with it. But as good as it might be, knowing all the projects that are going on out there, it'll probably be something not critical to the human race. So, anybody else? Yes?
So when you were looking into publishing options, did you consider the Creative Commons approach?
You know, it did. But then I had this idea that wouldn't it be great to be able to take some time away from working on software all the time? I will tell you this, if the book didn't go anywhere, for instance, Weathermaster, that program I was telling you about, I was going to just release that to the web as open source. So run with it for a couple of years, see how it does, and then release it to the web to allow people to do it. That's undoubtedly what I would have done, ultimately. Turns out Weathermaster was cracked anyway. Somebody in, well, what country was it? You know, somebody cracked that program. I was so impressed. And they put it on a BitTorrent somewhere. I didn't do anything about it because I was just trying to release it. And I was like, oh, it's already released. Well, thank you very much. You saved me the trouble. I would have been upset about, 10 years ago. You bastards. But, so, after a while, I would have. Anybody else? Any other questions? Again.
His question,
Sure.
I mean, with the whole Creative Commons, it seems like there's two different animals with self-publishing, those that provide free content. But I find that a lot of the evangelists for Creative Commons, many of them are now selling it. They have publishers and they're selling their books. It seems like it can only last so long.
I would never blame anybody for wanting to make a living at doing something they love. If you can't, then you're probably going to want to be read. If you're a writer and you can't get people to, you'll give it away. You want to develop an audience, and then later you can go back and publish using that audience, hopefully, and sell your writing. So I think it could go either way. You could start out in Creative Commons and go towards private publishing, or you could just let's say you were so successful that you just wanted to give something back to your audience for free. I could see you could go back and forth. All right.
Thank
I've
you.
worn you all out. Thank you very much. You guys were great.